one sentence, just one, that instantly shifts a man's entire perception of you. Not because it's clever, but because it comes from a woman who knows her worth. Say this once, and you'll never have to chase respect again. Are you ready to learn the line that makes a man stop, listen, and never look at you the same way again? There is a moment in every woman's life when she realizes that her words are not just expressions of emotion, but instruments of influence. The way you speak, the energy behind your tone, the pause before a response. These are not just soft skills. They are silent signals of your inner strength. Many believe that power is loud, that to be heard you must shout, that to be respected you must demand. But there is a deeper power, quiet, rooted, unshakable. And it begins the moment you learn how to speak from your center, not your chaos. Today, I want to invite you into a new kind of communication, one that doesn't just impress a man but awakens something in him. Respect, reverence, stillness. When a woman speaks with calm certainty, without defending or performing, a man listens not just with his ears, but with his whole presence. Because something in him recognizes that this isn't manipulation. It's not noise. It's truth. Now, what is that? One thing you say that changes everything. It's not a phrase you memorize. It's a tone, a clarity, an energy. And once you understand how to shape it, you will never need to repeat yourself to feel heard again. Welcome to Self-Mastery, your space for real wisdom and inner growth. Subscribe and remember name of our YouTube channel, Self-Mastery, because others may copy the voice, but the truth lives here. Let us begin. There is a moment in every woman's life when she realizes that her greatest strength is not found in how loudly she speaks, how passionately she argues, or how deeply she pleads for understanding. It is found in her silence, calm, deliberate, centered, and the clarity that radiates from within her. That clarity becomes the atmosphere in which respect either takes root or falls away. You see, the feminine is not meant to compete with noise. It was never designed to push, pull, or chase. Its true power is magnetic, not aggressive. And when a woman speaks from a place of deep emotional calm, her words become commands, not because she demands obedience, but because she radiates certainty. Emotional chaos weakens that power. Clarity sharpens it. Think about the last time you tried to explain yourself repeatedly to someone who had already made up their mind. The more you spoke, the more drained you felt. That isn't communication, it's erosion. When the mind is unsettled, the heart speaks in broken sentences, unsure of itself. But when the mind is anchored, like a lake undisturbed by wind, every word that surfaces carries depth, carries weight. The brain, particularly in men, is wired to respond more to energy than to language. This is a fact supported by neuroscience. Mirror neurons in the brain are more attuned to tone, facial expressions, and body language than they are to the content of speech. That means a man listens more to how you feel than to what you say. A calm woman who speaks with emotional neutrality, even when setting a boundary, triggers a very different psychological reaction than a woman who speaks with emotional volatility. One activates respect, the other activates resistance or dismissal. Let me offer you a real story. A woman named Elisa had spent years trying to gain the respect of her partner. Every disagreement turned into a lengthy emotional negotiation. She would cry, plead, raise her voice, and beg for him to see her value. But the more she poured out her heart, the less he seemed to care. Until one day, she changed everything, not by becoming colder, but by becoming still. When he crossed a boundary, she simply said, "I'm not available for this kind of interaction anymore. Let me know when you're ready to talk differently." And then she walked away. Not in anger, not in bitterness, but in absolute stillness. That night, for the first time in years, he followed her, not to argue, but to listen. What changed? Her emotional frequency. She stopped trying to be understood and started honoring her own inner knowing. And in doing so, she allowed her presence to speak louder than her words. That is what men feel the most: your presence, your composure, your clarity. Now let's go deeper. The sentence that realigns self-respect with boundaries isn't dramatic. It's simple. It may sound like, "That doesn't work for me," or "I don't accept being spoken to that way," or even, "Why can continue this when you're ready to be respectful?" Notice the key ingredient. No accusation, no insult, no venom. Just clarity. Just self-ownership. There's a profound elegance in this way of speaking. It doesn't attempt to control the other person. It simply defines the space in which you will participate. And that is what truly earns respect, when you show that your emotional world has a gate and not everyone gets to walk through it carelessly. A boundary is not a wall, it's a filter. It doesn't isolate you, it protects your peace. And a filter must be clear to be effective. That's why emotional chaos doesn't create strong boundaries. It creates confusion. People don't respect what feels unstable, but they will always respond to what feels settled and unwavering. In Eastern philosophy, there's a teaching about water. Water is soft, fluid, yielding, and yet, over time, it carves through mountains. That is the essence of feminine communication. It does not need to overpower to be effective. Its very presence, when aligned with clarity and intention, shapes the environment around it. Let me share a story that brings this to life. A woman named Amina worked in a high-pressure environment where her male colleagues often interrupted her. For years, she tried to be more assertive, speaking louder, talking faster, trying to match their pace. But nothing changed. One day, she tried something different. When interrupted, she paused, made eye contact, and said, "I'll continue when you're finished." That's it. No anger, no sarcasm, just calm presence. It only took 2 meetings for the interruptions to stop. Why? Because her sentence came from a place of internal authority, not insecurity. She didn't fight for respect, she claimed it through clarity. This kind of communication is not something you learn overnight. It comes from inner work, emotional mastery, breath work, body awareness. You begin to sense your emotions before they erupt. You start observing your triggers rather than reacting from them. You become the observer of your own mind. And from that higher perspective, your words become chosen, not charged. A woman who can calmly say one sentence that reflects her boundaries is not just respected, she is remembered. Because very few people can resist reacting. Very few people have trained their nervous system to stay grounded while standing up for themselves. And when a man meets such a woman, something in him shifts. He begins to realize he cannot manipulate her emotions because she governs them. That is where respect is born. Let us now consider a deeper truth. Men do not respect words alone. They respect congruence. When your words match your actions and your actions match your energy, you become trustworthy. And trust is the seed of respect. When a woman says, "I won't tolerate being spoken to disrespectfully," but continues to entertain conversations that drain her, her words become hollow. But when that same woman speaks softly, walks away when necessary, and continues her life in peace, she becomes unforgettable. She is no longer trying to be liked. She is living her standards. This is not about being emotionless. It is about being emotionally masterful. The difference is immense. Emotional suppression is silence rooted in fear. Emotional mastery is silence rooted in strength. One hides, the other leads. There is a sentence every woman must learn to speak, not just aloud, but inwardly. That sentence is, "My peace is more important than his attention." When you internalize that truth, your energy changes. Your voice slows down, your nervous system relaxes, and your presence begins to do the speaking for you. Men are more attuned to emotional vibration than they're often given credit for. When you shift your energy from desperation to detachment, not coldness, but peaceful detachment, his subconscious registers it. Respect follows. It doesn't always come immediately, but it always comes when your energy says, I'm no longer available for what dishonors me. It's worth remembering that love without respect is not love. It is possession, and possession without boundaries becomes control. A man who cannot respect your calm clarity will not value your love. But when your love is protected by emotional boundaries, it becomes a force. It becomes something he has to rise to meet. In this way, one sentence becomes a threshold, a line in the sand that defines who you are and what you allow. But it is the energy behind that sentence that makes it powerful. If you say it through tears and panic, it may still be heard. But if you say it through serenity and centeredness, it will echo. There is an old Zen saying, say only what cannot be improved by silence. This principle applies deeply to feminine communication. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is speak once, clearly, and then say no more. Your silence after your boundary becomes a mirror. In that stillness, he must see himself and decide whether he will rise or retreat. Now imagine this: a man says something sarcastic to diminish your confidence. Instead of reacting emotionally or defending yourself, you look him in the eyes and say, you're free to speak to me how you choose. I'm free to respond accordingly. And you walk away. You didn't attack. You didn't absorb. You simply stood. That moment lingers in his mind, not because of what you said, but because of what you didn't allow to move you. This is the beginning of feminine power, not in overpowering him, but in anchoring yourself. When you no longer need to convince a man of your worth, your presence starts to reveal it. And that is the essence of saying one thing once and being respected forever. When a woman expresses herself clearly and respectfully, without bending or breaking her truth to fit another person's expectations, something incredible happens. She is seen, not just noticed. There is a distinct difference between being observed and being truly perceived. The first is superficial, fleeting, reactive. The second is deeper. It evokes reflection. It challenges the other person to step into presence and meet her there. One of the most quietly powerful ways a woman earns lasting respect is through clear, non-negotiable communication, especially when it's not accompanied by aggression, but by grounded emotional clarity. This kind of communication isn't about dominating a man or controlling a relationship. It's about aligning her words with her values, making her boundaries known, and allowing her presence to speak before she ever raises her voice. A woman who can look someone in the eye and say, I don't allow that energy into my life, is not trying to intimidate. She's just telling the truth. Her truth. And in that truth lies her power. In many relationships, especially romantic ones, communication can become diluted. People start performing roles instead of having honest exchanges. A woman may suppress her intuition to avoid seeming difficult. A man may withdraw to avoid confrontation. And so the relationship begins to lose its vitality, not because love is missing, but because authenticity is. Communication rooted in clarity restores vitality, and it doesn't require fancy language or complicated therapy speak. It requires presence, honesty, and a willingness to be misunderstood without losing your center. Consider a woman named Elena. She had been dating a man for 6 months. In many ways, it was good. There was laughter, shared interests, a sense of emotional safety. But there was also a recurring issue. He would occasionally disappear. No explanation, no response to messages, for 2 or 3 days at a time. Then he'd return, as if nothing had happened. Elena didn't want to seem needy, so at first, she pretended to be okay with it. But her inner self was not at peace. Her dignity was being eroded. One evening, after his return from another unexplained absence, Elena didn't scold or cry. She simply said, "I value consistency and communication. Silence for days doesn't align with the kind of relationship I'm building. If that works for you, I understand. But it doesn't work for me. I won't ask you to change, but I won't shrink to stay." There was no drama, no threats, just clarity. That sentence changed everything, not because it manipulated him, but because it held a mirror up to his behavior without trying to control his reaction. The power of her words came from her willingness to walk away if they were not honored. A man may test boundaries, not always to harm, but to see if they are real. And once he encounters a boundary that does not flinch, his respect for the person standing behind it deepens. This is not about pride or ego. It is about emotional maturity. When a woman shows that she communicates from a place of inner alignment, where her peace matters more than pleasing someone, she invites a different kind of interaction. One built not on tension or compliance, but on resonance. It's worth remembering. You teach people how to treat you, not by what you preach, but by what you consistently allow. When communication is vague, boundaries get trampled. When communication is reactive, relationships become war zones. But when communication is conscious, firm, respectful, emotionally grounded, relationships evolve. This clarity isn't just spoken, it's in the energy behind the words, the tone, the timing, the courage to pause instead of react. A woman can ask for what she needs without justifying it. She can express her standards without insulting anyone else's. She can say no without guilt. All of this communicates a powerful message. I have done the inner work. I know what I stand for, and I don't need anyone else to shrink or change for me to remain at peace. Alongside this principle of clear, grounded communication comes a subtle, often overlooked energy, emotional poise. This is the quiet presence a woman carries when she refuses to be emotionally hijacked by external behavior. Emotional poise does not mean repression. It means regulation. It is the ability to respond rather than react, to stay centered when others spiral. Imagine a woman named Zara. She's in a committed relationship, but her partner has a habit of shutting down during disagreements. He doesn't yell, he doesn't insult, he simply retreats. For years, Zara would chase him emotionally. She'd beg him to talk. She'd cry, she'd panic, but nothing changed. Eventually, something inside her shifted. Instead of collapsing into emotional urgency, she started cultivating internal stillness. During the next disagreement, when he retreated, she didn't pursue. She breathed, she journaled. She sat in the discomfort without trying to fix it. And then, a few hours later, he returned, not out of guilt, but curiosity. "You're different," he said. "Why didn't you chase me?" She answered softly, "Because I realized chasing doesn't bring closeness. It only feeds fear. I'm learning to sit with myself, and I hope you'll learn to sit with me too." That one moment was a turning point. Not because she used a new strategy, but because she embodied a new energy. Emotional poise transforms relationships, not by suppressing pain, but by refusing to outsource emotional regulation to others. A woman who possesses emotional poise is not easily provoked. She listens before she speaks. She does not weaponize silence, but she uses it wisely. Her restraint is not weakness. It's strength wrapped in stillness. In psychology, we often talk about emotional co-regulation, the way people unconsciously influence each other's nervous systems. If one partner becomes anxious, the other may absorb that anxiety. But the reverse is also true. When one partner maintains calm, grounded energy, they create an emotional space that invites the other person to relax, reflect, and rise. Emotional poise allows a woman to be soft without being fragile, assertive without being aggressive, and present without being overbearing. It is a deeply feminine form of power, not because it conforms to outdated gender roles, but because it is rooted in intuitive wisdom. The wisdom that says, I don't have to meet chaos with chaos. I can meet it with calm. There's a powerful teaching found in both Eastern philosophy and neuroscience. What we pay attention to grows. When a woman fixates on being heard, she often misses the deeper opportunity to hear herself first. When she learns to sit in silence long enough to discern her real needs, her communication becomes cleaner. Her boundaries become clearer. Her energy becomes more magnetic. There is no substitute for a woman who knows herself, not in theory, but in practice. She knows what centers her. She knows what triggers her. She knows how to move from reaction to reflection. And because of that self-awareness, her presence demands a certain reverence, not through control, but through coherence. When a woman speaks from this place, men listen differently. They may not always agree, but they feel the difference. Her words don't just pass through the ears. They settle in the bones because they carry the weight of authenticity. The silence between her words is just as important as the words themselves. In a culture that glorifies constant talking, instant replies, and quick reactions, this type of energy is rare. But that's why it's respected. A woman who can pause in the heat of conflict and ask herself, what do I need right now? Not just what do I feel, is already ahead of the conversation. This kind of inner work doesn't just elevate relationships. It elevates the woman herself. And from that place, she becomes a mirror, not for perfection, but for presence. She reminds others of their own capacity to be still, to listen, to grow. And if a man is capable of real depth, he won't run from this presence. He will lean in, not because he's afraid of losing her, but because he's inspired not to lose himself in shallowness. The feminine energy that holds clear communication and emotional poise together is not rigid. It's fluid, but it's not weak. It bends, but doesn't break. It feels deeply, but doesn't drown. It listens, but doesn't absorb toxicity. In this quiet strength lies a sacred invitation. Come with honesty, or don't come at all. Come with respect, or stay at a distance. Come with presence, or be met with peace that asks for nothing but offers everything. When a woman starts speaking from a place of calm inner authority, she no longer needs to raise her voice, prove her worth, or seek external validation. There is a difference between demanding respect and embodying it. That difference is energetic, not verbal, and it is deeply felt by the men around her. One of the most transformative realizations a woman can have in her relationships is this: it is not what you say, but the energy behind what you say that determines how you are treated. The power behind your words doesn't come from their volume or sharpness. It comes from your presence, the grounded, clear, self-knowing energy that you bring into the space. When that is intact, you become someone who is not easy to ignore or manipulate, not because you are loud, but because you are internally aligned. Imagine a woman standing in front of a man who is testing her boundaries, perhaps subtly, arriving late to plans, dismissing her feelings, laughing off serious concerns. She could plead, she could yell, or she could explain, hoping to get him to understand. But there is another way, a way far more powerful. She pauses, looks directly at him, and with quiet steadiness says, "This doesn't work for me." That sentence, delivered without emotional charge, without flinching, is a boundary wrapped in clarity. And what makes it magnetic is not only the sentence itself, but the unshakable energy behind it, the inner belief that her standards matter. This is the kind of woman men remember long after the conversation is over. Because that calm confidence leaves a lasting imprint. It tells the world, I know who I am. I will not collapse to be liked. I am not here to beg. I am here to connect, but only in truth. In today's world, many women are taught to either suppress their voice in fear of being seen as too much, or to swing to the opposite extreme, using confrontation and emotional volatility to claim space. Neither of these paths lead to the deep respect or connection she truly desires. But there is a middle path. A path rooted in presence, emotional regulation, and an unwavering commitment to self-respect. That path is what creates a woman who can say very little and yet shift the entire atmosphere of a room. There's an ancient proverb that says, when the soul is settled, the tongue speaks wisdom. It's not about using poetic words. It's about speaking only what is necessary and allowing silence to carry the rest. True feminine power doesn't chase approval. It invites alignment, and this power becomes especially apparent in the way a woman chooses to address disrespect. Let's take a story from a real life coaching experience. A woman named Lila had been dating a man for about 5 months. In the beginning, he was attentive and expressive, but over time he began making passive-aggressive jokes about her goals and diminishing her ideas in front of others. Layla was no stranger to confrontation, but instead of reacting the way she had in past relationships, through tears or defensiveness, she decided to do something radically different. The next time it happened, she waited until they were alone. She centered herself with a few breaths and said, calmly, when you make jokes about what I care about, even in front of friends, it tells me that my voice isn't safe here. I won't continue in a space where I feel belittled. I want connection, not competition. If that's something you can meet me in, I'm open. If not, I will lovingly step away. He was speechless, not because she raised her voice, but because she didn't. The conversation wasn't rooted in blame, but in clarity, and that clarity changed everything. Not only did it lead him to apologize, but it marked a new foundation for how they communicated going forward. And more importantly, Lila had shifted something inside herself. She had become the kind of woman who no longer abandons herself for the sake of peace. There's a reason this approach is so effective. Men respond not only to what is said, but to the emotional state that delivers it. If your energy is scattered, anxious, or needy, it translates. But if your energy is calm, rooted, and whole, they feel it and they adjust accordingly. It's like the difference between a turbulent sea and a still lake. Both are water, but only one reflects the sky clearly. One of the most compelling pieces of neuroscience that supports this is the study of emotional contagion. The phenomenon where people unconsciously mirror the emotional states of those around them. If you enter a conversation in a grounded state, with slow breath, steady voice, and regulated nervous system, the person you're speaking with is more likely to meet you there. Emotional leadership doesn't come from controlling others. It comes from mastering yourself. A woman who practices this becomes unforgettable, not because she forces her way into a man's heart, but because her energy leaves an imprint on his nervous system. He associates her with peace, with directness, with presence, and in a world saturated with distraction, that kind of presence becomes irresistible. But it requires discipline. Not the discipline of suppression, but the discipline of self-awareness. You must know your own triggers. You must recognize when you're tempted to explain yourself too much, when you're slipping into people pleasing, or when you're trying to fix instead of simply stating the truth. The woman who earns deep respect knows when to speak, and she knows when to simply withdraw her energy without making a scene. Here is another quiet but powerful example. A woman named Alina was in the early stages of dating a man who kept canceling plans at the last minute. At first, she gave him the benefit of the doubt, but by the third time, instead of sending a paragraph or demanding answers, she sent a single sentence. I value consistency and reliability. I sense our rhythms may not align. I wish you well. And then she disengaged. No drama, no accusations, just clarity. 3 days later, he reached out, asking for another chance. But Alina, grounded in her standards, declined. She wasn't looking to teach someone how to treat her. She was already treating herself with that level of respect. And it wasn't about punishing him. It was about protecting her peace. This is what it means to speak once and be heard. When your words come from alignment, you don't need to repeat yourself. You don't need to convince. You don't need to chase. The energy behind your voice does the work for you. This also ties into a deeper spiritual truth. Your voice is an extension of your energy field. When your inner world is fragmented, your voice wavers. When your inner world is whole, your voice becomes like a tuning fork, resonant, clear, unshakable. This is why two people can say the same sentence, but only one will be truly heard. And what gives that voice its authority is not volume, but inner alignment. A powerful shift happens when a woman moves from reactive communication to conscious communication. When she starts asking herself, what energy am I bringing into this conversation? Rather than just, what should I say? That shift alone elevates her relationships. She begins to attract people who meet her at the level of clarity she lives at. There's a quote by Viktor Frankl that says, between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. That space is where self-respect lives. That space is where your feminine power matures. And from that space, the words you choose, no matter how few, carry weight. So what does this look like in day-to-day interactions? It looks like calmly saying, let's revisit this when we're both in a clearer space. Instead of arguing in heat, it looks like silently leaving the room when someone crosses a line rather than trying to prove your worth to them. It looks like listening fully, even to someone who disagrees with you, because your inner stability doesn't depend on external validation. And above all, it looks like embodying your own words, because nothing you say will matter if your life doesn't reflect it. Integrity is the greatest amplifier of your voice. In the end, respect is not demanded, it is inspired, and inspiration comes from congruence. When your voice, your values, and your actions align, you become a force. A silent, steady, sovereign force that commands attention without asking for it. Not all men will understand this, but the ones who do, the ones capable of true partnership, will rise to meet you there. Not because you instructed them, but because your presence showed them the way. And once a man experiences that level of clarity in a woman, that calm, unwavering presence, it leaves an imprint he doesn't forget. Because in that presence, he finds something rare, a reflection of his own higher self. A woman like that doesn't only earn respect, she awakens it. There is a silent kind of power in a woman who knows how to walk away. Not out of anger, not as a tactic, but with deep peace in her heart. When a woman walks away from a relationship, a conversation, or a dynamic that consistently dishonors her spirit, she is not giving up. She is rising. And what often surprises many is that this moment of departure, rooted in clarity and not revenge, awakens a deeper level of respect from the man she once tried so hard to reach. The sixth and final principle is about the subtle, yet transformative strength of boundaries. When a woman sets a boundary and honors it without apology, she teaches others how to value her presence. And in the context of a romantic relationship, this is where a shift occurs. Not through force, but through alignment. Consider a woman who finds herself in a pattern with a man who disappears emotionally when things get vulnerable. He avoids real conversations, withdraws when she expresses her needs, and responds with passive silence rather than mutual engagement. Many women in such scenarios attempt to explain, fix, or overextend themselves to be understood. But there comes a moment when words no longer serve, when a woman stops over-explaining and instead quietly adjusts her availability. A new message is sent, one that cannot be denied. It says, I value peace over chaos, and I choose alignment over attachment. There's a story told of a woman named Salma who spent 4 years in a relationship with a man who was intermittently present, kind, then cold, then charming, then distant. She kept trying to understand what changed him, took emotional responsibility for his detachment, and delayed her own growth, hoping he'd evolve. But one morning, after another night of emotional absence, she didn't call, she didn't text, she didn't cry. She sat in silence and heard a deeper voice inside whisper, "You've already given enough evidence of your love. Now it's time to give evidence of your wisdom." Salma didn't threaten to leave. She didn't post vague messages online. She simply redirected her energy inward. She enrolled in a course she had been postponing, started journaling again, and focused on cultivating peace, not proof. Days passed. Then a message arrived from him, noticing her distance, asking why she wasn't responding the same. The truth, she hadn't distanced herself. She had returned to herself. That, more than anything else, unsettled him. The turning point wasn't the absence. It was the shift in energy. And men feel this shift more than they admit. When a woman is no longer trying to be understood, but is now seeking understanding within herself, she radiates a presence that speaks louder than any plea. That presence, grounded and unattached, evokes a primal respect. She's no longer leaning in. She's centered. And in that center, she becomes magnetic, not because she is performing femininity, but because she is embodying wholeness. A man may not always articulate what he feels when a woman chooses herself, but energetically, something changes. He may question his own patterns. He may suddenly remember the conversations she tried to have. He may finally feel the space she once filled, not because she made him feel guilty, but because her absence revealed the weight of her presence. Emotional discipline is the soul of this principle. When a woman can feel deeply yet act wisely, she transcends cycles of reactivity. That doesn't mean she suppresses her emotions. It means she channels them consciously. Neuroscience affirms that when we step back from emotional triggers and allow the frontal cortex, the rational part of the brain, to take leadership, we make better long-term decisions. And in relationships, this allows us to move from impulse to integrity. Imagine a man who repeatedly speaks over his partner when she tries to express a concern. The reactive part of her may yell back, shut down, or seek validation elsewhere. But the woman rooted in emotional clarity may pause, look at this behavior, and say to herself, this is not a conversation, it's a cycle. And with that awareness, she chooses to disengage, not out of punishment, but because no transformation can happen where respect is absent. Some may argue that walking away is harsh, but walking away with grace is one of the most loving things a woman can do, for herself and the other. It communicates, I will no longer participate in dynamics that dishonor the love I carry. And in doing so, she invites the other to rise, not through caution, but through example. There's a quote that says, you do not rise by lowering your standard. You rise by enforcing it peacefully. This is the heartbeat of feminine power. It's not about confrontation, it's about calibration. It's not about being right, it's about being aligned. And when a woman calibrates her presence to match her peace, she becomes a mirror through which others must confront their own behavior. Let's look at emotional energy through the lens of Eastern philosophy. In many ancient traditions, the feminine is symbolized not as fire, but as water, fluid, adaptable, but also capable of carving through rock. When a woman stops begging for love and starts embodying her own worth, she flows, not away from the man, but toward her higher self. And in doing so, she changes the energetic landscape of the relationship. This transformation isn't always visible at first. It may not be met with applause, but something fundamental changes. A man begins to see her not as someone who will bend endlessly, but as someone whose peace is non-negotiable. That creates either one of two outcomes. He rises to meet her in that sacred space, or he removes himself because he can no longer feed off emotional imbalance. In either case, she wins. Not because she manipulated the outcome, but because she honored her inner truth. There's another woman named Aisha who was in a marriage where communication had all but collapsed. Her husband would routinely dismiss her concerns with sarcasm or silence. One day, after expressing the same unmet need for the 100th time, she stopped mid-sentence and said, "This isn't a dialogue anymore. It's a performance, and I'm done performing." He laughed, thinking it was another emotional exaggeration. But something was different. Aisha didn't cry that night. She sat in silence, read a book, and slept peacefully. Over the next few weeks, she stopped reminding him of his promises. She stopped reacting to his moods. And one day, she said she was moving to a different room. Not as punishment, but for clarity. That shift made him pause. It wasn't her absence. It was her presence becoming selective that made him confront his behavior. Whether or not their marriage survived, Aisha's inner transformation was irreversible. She had awakened to a new way of relating with herself. So many women believe that emotional labor will earn them love. That if they explain more, show more patience, or make themselves more available, the man will finally get it. But relationships are not classrooms. You're not here to tutor someone into treating you well. You're here to reflect the love you desire by how you show up for yourself. When you say less and observe more, you see clearly. When you retreat without resentment, you heal. When you stop begging for love and begin embodying love, you shift timelines, not just in romance, but in life. There is a law in psychology called intermittent reinforcement. The idea that behavior is maintained most strongly not by consistent rewards, but by unpredictable ones. This explains why many women stay in relationships where the man gives just enough to keep hope alive, but not enough to build something real. The antidote: consistency, not in the man, but in your own standards. When your boundary is no longer a request, but a requirement, you remove yourself from the manipulation of inconsistency. Walking away isn't about distance, it's about direction. It says, I will not walk away from love. I will walk toward love, starting with the love I owe myself. And when you operate from that place, everything changes. You no longer need closure because clarity becomes your compass. You no longer need apologies because alignment becomes your affirmation. And you no longer need someone to prove your worth because your worth is no longer on trial. The final truth is this: when a woman walks away with a peaceful heart, she's not giving up, she's coming home. And in doing so, she teaches others what love should feel like: rooted, calm, and free. There comes a time in every woman's journey when she no longer moves through life seeking validation, but instead radiates quiet certainty. She doesn't chase respect. She commands it, not through force, but through alignment. Not by raising her voice, but by raising her standard. Because true feminine power does not seek to overpower. It seeks to awaken. It speaks once with presence. It walks away when boundaries are crossed. It leads with stillness and responds with wisdom. And when this energy is embodied, it's not just men who notice. The world begins to shift. Doors open. Peace deepens. And love, real love, arrives not because she begged for it, but because she became the kind of woman it cannot ignore. This isn't about controlling anyone else. It's about returning to the quiet authority within yourself. When you speak from there, even once, he will feel it. And he will never forget it. If this message touched you, subscribe to Self Mastery and join a community grounded in growth and wisdom. Leave a comment below. Your story might inspire someone else on their journey.